And Patrick, can you also turn up the volume on this right there? Thank you guys so much for coming. Just out of curiosity, how many of you have seen The Imposter? Oh, this is awesome. You guys have to go back and watch this movie over the weekend. It still blows my mind, and so I was really excited to see what happens with something that's a little bit more scripted and dramatic. And I love the way that you're blending fiction and nonfiction. So, where did you first hear about this story?
So I think I have a memory of reading the story on a flight back from the States, and I think it was on the way back from Sundance after showing The Imposter. Just read about it in a magazine. Thought it sounded like a bizarre and sort of, I mean, my background is in documentaries, so, you're always looking for stranger than fiction, true stories, and, there seem to be enough of those to not have to worry about making one up. And this, it was just so intriguing, not least because of the people who were involved with the crime, that the more I read about them, the more it seemed improbable that they would be involved with it, and unlikely that they could ever have imagined that they would get away with it. And so I reached out to them. By this point, they were serving a very long prison sentence, and they had some time on their hands to write letters back. And we started this sort of pen pal correspondence with each of them. And I have a co-producer who worked with me on The Imposter, and we just spent some time sort of getting to know them. Literally, they didn't really have access to email, and they used to send their letters on prison notepaper, which was written like 3 lines per line. And, I was just curious to understand the why of it. And I thought it was a great yarn. Everything I learned about it, I just thought this is a great, everyone loves a heist movie, but it was the things they put in their letters, the things they talked about, and the honesty of what they said about the motivation. Spencer, for example, talking about this deep yearning to become an artist and feeling that his life was too bereft of interesting life experience or suffering, that he was kind of craving some kind of tragedy. Just seemed an extraordinary and sort of relevant idea, this generation and these really rather lost young men searching for an identity in all the wrong places. And that was the thing that made me think, oh, well, maybe, we can tell a great heist movie, but we can also, tell a story about, which touches on questions of identity and masculinity and, the need to live this so-called important, special life,
And was any of the screenplay based on the memoir?
Or, as I was the screenplay was almost entirely based around the letters.
Okay.
And, and as you've seen in the film, they didn't always remember things in the same way. And, and you can either, as a dramatist, you can either choose one version because it's more cinematic, or if you're a producer, because it might be cheaper to shoot in that way, but actually I thought, well, let's make a virtue of that. The whole thing, the whole idea is that the movie and the form of the movie somehow reflects this sort of idea of sort of choosing to try and inhabit a movie instead of reality. And we start in a place of kind of relative naturalism, and as they become more and more detached from reality and more lost in the fantasy, so we go deeper into kind of movie world, into closer to Ocean's 11 and all of that sort of the stuff that was inspiring their behavior in some ways.
How much of this testimony did you actually share with the actors who were going to play these real people? Blake, tell us a little bit about that process. If you had communication with the person you're playing, if it was all if each actor was really only given the point of view of the person that they were playing, how did that work for the two of you?
Well, when I was cast, Bart and I had spoken about everything about what I thought of the character. I told him the way I kind of like to dive into projects and unlock the character and stuff like that. But when we got to that subject, he told me that he didn't want us having conversations with our counterparts because he didn't want us feeling like some blind sense of responsibility to have them played in a certain way.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't want us, feeling like we had our choices stripped from us and that we were walking on eggshells while, trying to give a performance, but also trying to not let somebody down, which is what I totally understood. Because I feel like if you're speaking to someone, you will feel a responsibility for it, and you'll feel like you're kind of in this box, and you're going to do your best to be in this box. But the fact that he kind of allowed us to get to know these characters and kind of put our own blood into it a little bit, it was very liberating as an actor.
Yeah, because, at this point they were 10 years older. Most of that 10 years had been spent in prison. So, I felt like there was going to be limited benefit, and there is that thing of, I don't think they would have necessarily tried to kind of shape the portrayal, but, they are likable human beings. And, I didn't want these guys feeling, as Blake says, sort of obliged to do right by them. They made some big mistakes, and I felt like what was on the page and the conversations that we would have should be what he used as his, that he should find his own version of Chaz rather than, 30-year-old Chaz sort of dictating how he wanted to be portrayed or whatever.
Well, you bring up sort of issues of sort of responsibility towards the subject or not wanting people to feel like they need to do certain things for the people they're portraying, and this is something that I think also comes directly also out of documentaries. Sort of the responsibility to the people whose stories you're telling. But here you're sort of weaving these sort of multiple points of view, and it's dramatized, but it's also documentary at times. So tell us a little bit about your own personal relationship to the four of them, and you as a filmmaker. What are the considerations you have in terms of how you're going to tell their story, especially when the story is seen by four completely different points of view?
Yeah, I mean, I think that this obviously is not a documentary, but it is a true story. I was very kind of keen to preserve the truth as much as possible, and also it was so bonkers at times that it didn't need much fictionalizing. It was sort of there was enough on the of what happened. All of the mayhem around the elevator and Warren nearly getting run over and stuff. I didn't have to make that up. So, but at the same time, there is a responsibility. Anytime you're telling someone's story, there's a limit. And I think, there are a lot of examples of Hollywood movies where it says based on a true story, and then just masses of kind of creative liberties have been taken, and you don't really have any sense of what's true and what's not. And I showed them all the film before we showed it publicly at Sundance, and that's always a nerve-wracking moment because you don't know how they're gonna react and whether they're gonna feel that it's truthful or they'll see themselves. And fortunately, they all, I think there were things that they would have liked to have not had in the film because they were awkward or, and they obviously regret so much of it. But they all felt that it was very honest. And, obviously we showed it to BJ, the librarian. She was probably the only person who, if she'd had major issues with any part of it and felt that she'd been misrepresented, I would have probably gone back into the edit and changed it. I wouldn't have felt comfortable given that she was the victim. Felt really important that piece of it was accurate. And, we screened it in her house, and she got progressively more hammered during the screening. And I think her husband fell asleep. He was so bored. And I was sat with like 4 cats on my lap, and we had a blast, and she laughed, and she was like, "You gotta give me the soundtrack. I love it," and she just said she really loved it, and she's an amazing woman anyway, and she loves Ann Dowd, so that was great. And she said, interestingly, at the end, she said, you know what, I think for the first time I can feel some forgiveness towards them now. Because up until that point, I think she, I think only seeing the movie, she realized that actually they were kind of idiots rather than criminals, if you know what I mean. And that was that was, so it wasn't that, that they were bad, they just, it got completely out of hand.
Blake, have you since had conversations with Chaz?
Oh yeah, we went golfing like last weekend. No, I met him for the first time at Sundance, and it was right after I'd seen the movie, and Bart had let us know that the real guys had seen the movie too. And this is also this is like kind of a testament to Bart telling us not to not to focus too much on the real guys and getting information from the real guys. Kind of find it on your own, because after meeting him. And I also met his mother at Sundance and his sister too, and they were really thankful for the message that the film portrayed, and they felt that it was an honest portrayal of Chaz as well. And I think that was kind of an interesting moment, because even though I didn't have to seek out any information, I think just being thrown into this situation and being encouraged to be as honest as you can and take the liberty, take chances, go from 1, go to 10, we'll find it. Don't be afraid of failure. You kind of just are honest with yourself, and I think it was just resonated with him, which is nice.
How early on in the process did you know that this was going to be mostly scripted, and how willing were each one of them to agree for this story to be told? I mean, how was it a long process, or was it all pretty much as an outgrowth of the letter writing that you guys came to some sort of agreement?
I mean, initially, we weren't even able to tell the story because, a big Hollywood producer had paid way more money than we were ever going to pay for the rights to the article that was in Vanity Fair, and also their individual life rights. So when we were corresponding, there was a kind of like, oh, well, maybe we'll never be able to tell this story, but it was still sort of fascinating to me. And then time went by. Nothing was really going to happen until they came out of prison anyway, because I always knew that I wanted them in the film in some way, because it was them that it was them as individuals, and the fact that they were, obviously they were deeply misguided, but they weren't. They were trying in a very misguided way to kind of conduct this weird existential experiment with their lives, and and I felt that element of it, without them in it, it would be a much more disposable movie. You wouldn't feel the same emotional investment, even though on paper you probably and some people may or may not have felt that, but I think you do relate to them in many ways, and I certainly felt that. And I thought, so for me, it was always going to have this form. It was going to be a narrative, fiction film with these elements of, non-fiction, which would kind of remind you constantly to not suspend disbelief, to kind of to participate, and to kind of be reminded that this is real, and so the consequences are going to be real, and you're constantly going, where is this going to end, and what's going to happen? And so I just think you have more skin in the game somehow. And that was the experiment. And coming from docs, with The Imposter, it was a sort of hybrid, and this was a sort of an itch I felt I had to scratch to see, is there another way of telling a true story? It's not the thing that we've all seen with, the nice pictures of the real people at the end, and then you come out of the cinema and you're Googling furiously, was Molly from Molly's Game did she really sound like Aaron Sorkin,
Yeah. When you actually went to interview these guys on camera, first of all, did anything about the stories change as the telling of it from their points of view went from letters to on camera? And also, was there a strategy in the order in which you filmed them? Anything that might not be obvious from having seen the film?
Yeah, I mean, I had to write the script before doing the interviews with them, and the script was based on the things they'd said in the letters. But then when we shot the interviews, they didn't say what they said in the letters. In fact, they went off beat. They said things that I hadn't anticipated. And bear in mind, I've written a script. I've got the money to shoot it, and the bit that I can't guarantee is how the real people are gonna perform, because it was based on what they'd already said. But the last thing you want to do is try and turn the documentary contributors into actors, because then you lose the thing that they're there to do, which is that thing, that the authentic kind of the reality of it. So in the end, I just had to kind of throw the script away and then go back in the way that I would a normal documentary, go through the process of interviewing them, and things came out of it that I hadn't anticipated. And then I went back and I was like, oh, I don't know, it didn't go how I'd expected. And Catherine, who's one of our brilliant producers, is at the back of the room, and I was like on the phone to her going, we have to pause, because I need to rewrite the script around what we really have got here. And I think actually at the end of the day that made the whole thing stronger. There were lots of things that came out of it. I hadn't quite anticipated the depth of regret that they felt almost instantaneously in that last act, where they're kind of almost desperate to be caught so that they can be redeemed somehow.
And what about involving BJ as an actual on-camera interviewee? What was that process like? At what point was the project in when you went to her?
Yeah, well, that took a long time. She didn't know what kind of a film we wanted to make. She didn't know whether it was going to be a kind of caper comedy. There was no way. I think, and when we eventually sat down with her, and I sort of said, "Look, this is what I'm hoping to do with it, and it's not going to be it's not going to be glorified. It's not going to be, Then I think she could see the value in it, and then, came on board, and we shot, an interview with her, and there was a lot more that she said, but then I always felt like it made sense to hold her back and give her the last word, kind of thing.
Blake, tell us a little bit about developing some chemistry with the other cast members. There's obviously a lot of really great actors in this film, but there needs to be that sort of solid core, and I'm curious a little bit about what that process is like getting ready for it.
Yeah, that was like the funnest part of it for me. I thought that was like the most important homework was to form a bond with each other, because there's so many moments in the film where you have to be vulnerable with each other and not be afraid to go certain places. So Bart made sure that we could live together for a week while we were rehearsing, which was so awesome, because we'd go, we would rehearse with Bart, we'd figure scenes out, talk them through, and then I'd back at the place we're all staying at, we'd watch Cops, and we'd Postmates, staying in burgers and stuff, and just joke around. There was a fire a little fire pit where we were staying, so we'd hang out there and listen to music and just relate and talk about the script and talk about how excited we were and talk about what it meant to us and how it was different from anything else we'd read or been a part of before. So yeah, once we got that going, the rest of it was just so freeing, and it felt so comfortable, because we had already kind of formed, our friendship and became a family essentially.
Bart, tell us a little bit through your side of it. When you have your actors do something like that, what did you witness over that period of time?
Well, I don't think they were all keen to live together to begin with, because it's hard, isn't it? It's like you don't know the other three. You're being forced to kind of live quite closely together. And I felt that, because those experiences we all have, when you're traveling, whatever, and you're sort of thrown into something, I have these memories of getting on a 9-hour bus journey, and by the end feeling like I'd made a best mate, just because of the proximity that we were forced to occupy. And so I felt very strongly that whether they liked it or not, that was what was going to happen. And they just got on great, and it was amazing because Blake in particular, as you see, there are a number of scenes, big scenes, which Chaz is not there for, and Blake would come every day to rehearsal and just be there and be part of the gang and be supportive and be, and we had a very open process where if someone's got a good idea, you know, I would be an idiot not to hear it. Do you know what I mean? And so you know, there are lots of great lines that I would love to take responsibility, you know, take credit for writing all of them, but there were lines that these guys would throw in and be like, yeah, we'll have that, you will have that. And that was just a brilliantly fun part of the process. And I think you also get a sense that they start to feel like they can really contribute, that they're not puppets. They're you know, you want to see them be allowed to do the thing that they do. And I as a documentary man, I'd never written a screenplay before, and I'd never my directing of actors was limited, and I was worried. I was like, is this stuff I've written gonna work? And then they showed up day one of rehearsal, and I was like, oh phew, this is gonna work. Not just it's gonna work, it's gonna be good. You know, they suddenly do the thing that these magical, clever people do, and these things that I'd written, they suddenly made real. And I watch it now, and there's no part of what I see that feels like words that I wrote. They belong to these guys. Yeah.
I'm curious a little bit about some of the formal technique and how that may have transitioned from your documentaries, or may have been, you know, sort of something that you wanted to do that was completely different. Obviously, The Imposter also has very strong sort of aesthetic, formal values. And I'm curious about whether or not there were things that you intentionally drew upon from your time in documentary versus things that you intentionally wanted to avoid doing.
Yeah, I mean, I had a very specific kind of intention in terms of the way the grammar of the film was going to be, you know, in terms of the camera movement, the color palette, the score, the soundscape, you know, that it was all going to be a sense of, you know, kind of falling into a more, you know, I guess going towards the tropes of the heist movies that they would have been watching, and you know, and that so as we get deeper into the fantasy, they start to, you know, the colors start to change. It becomes a little more glossy in parts. There's more stuff with Steadicam, with track, with this, that, and the other. You know, more commercial music, more all of that kind of stuff, and you know, lots of, you know, I planned all the transitions very carefully, and I storyboarded most of it. Not that I was going to show it to anyone, just that I like to have a very kind of clear plan of what I'm doing, and then if something better comes up, you can kind of throw that away. And you know, and visually, we had a very specific kind of look for the film. And then there's this point where, you know, such as when the actual heist itself happens, all of the camera movement, all the rest of it is very, very what's the word? It's pretty precise up until the moment where he physically grabs it, and then we go into, which is much more comfortable for me, is like pure handheld documentary, run and gun, and we just are behind the action, desperately trying to keep up with. But the reality is that's great to do in a doc. If you try and do that in fiction, you actually have to be more well planned, because people will get hurt. You know, you can't. In order to have that kind of documentary frenetic quality, you actually have to be really well choreographed in terms of where people move, and then allow it to happen in long takes and stuff like that. And so, but there was a very clear moment, and in the script it was written that, you know, the color suddenly slightly drains away, and we're not in this nice kind of moody kind of nice crunchy blacks and all of that actually we go into something that just feels a little less polished, and then it's all a bit uncomfortable and real for quite a while in that, you know, in the immediate aftermath of the robbery.
One last thing, and then we'll open it up to the audience. The fiction nonfiction obviously applies to cast and real people. Does it also bleed into other components to this, like location shooting, other components that we may not be able to tell just from having watched the film?
Sorry, in terms of
whether or not you shot in real location.
Oh yeah, I mean, you know, if it's up to me, everything would be as close to the real place as possible, just because you get so much for free, you know. And my whole ethos up until shooting a union film with loads and loads of people is just steal everything. And like when that scene where when they come into New York, I thought, oh, this is easy. We'll just point the camera out the window and we'll go around the block a couple of times and happy days. And they were like, no. All of those people you see on the streets in New York, they're extras, and that blew my mind. I was like, what? But that's the difference between you can't just use someone's likeness and hope to kind of just get away with it. And so that I found, like, in docs you're just capturing reality. In this, you're manufacturing it, and trying to keep that same degree of looseness and authenticity is I found that challenging, and but then with all that circus comes all kinds of other things that you can do that you couldn't do with a small crew and all the rest of it. So yeah, we shot on a university campus. We built the special collections room within their library. It didn't look like that. We modeled had an amazing production designer who had done huge movies, and nothing was too difficult for him. He was like, because the outside of the building they go into is a completely different building from where we shot the actual robbery itself. And where we shot the robbery was a real library, but it had 30-foot high glass windows. And he was just like, yeah, don't worry, I'll just put wood on those. I'll just print off some wood and put it up there. And like we're like, what? And it was amazing, wasn't it? Like everything, And so, it's that kind of There were so many things, and and he built the book, and the book was made to be exactly the same weight and dimension and everything and I wouldn't let the guys touch it until the day we shot, so they had no idea how heavy it was going to be. And that book is so fucking heavy, you wouldn't believe it. And they planned to steal 4 of them. Anyway. Yeah, I mean...
All right, let's open this up.
Who wants to jump in? Yep.
Marvelous. In so many ways. One of the things that I think is most remarkable about it is the humor without it trying to be humorous. Just that minivan that pulls up, the door opens, the guy gets in, it closes, and you laugh. Were you conscious of that? Were you conscious of trying to put humor into the film?
Yeah, I was. Because, this thing is, it's easier to generate laughs when you've got a degree of tension. Because, we're desperate for an outlet for that. And so if you're balancing stuff that feels quite tense with stuff that feels sort of... Because there was an absurdity to the whole thing, which you can't ignore, right? I mean, but I'm glad you mentioned the door closing thing, because that drove us fucking crazy. It was like there was a whole getaway thing, and then it was like beep 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 beep, like this kind of, you couldn't. And the thing is, the car can't move until the door's shut. So I was like, I was talking to the locations guy. We had 2 of those vans actually. One of them we disabled that mechanism so that we could have a moment where when he throws them out, and then he's like, "Fuck you," and I'm off. Well, but then when we were doing it, I was like, killing myself laughing. I was like, this is genius. Let's just keep that in there, and we'll shoot the kind of, because they're so slick, and there's this sort of shot where he gets in from the height, and it all seems kind of like this clockwork operation, and then that. So yes, I'm glad you pointed that. Yeah, and I think in every scene we wanted a combination of shock, tension, occasional comedy, and occasional tragedy. That there's that sort of balance, and I think that's when cinema is most fun, when you kind of treading that tightrope between those things.
Yes.
It's obvious they never saw Rafifi or Topkapi in their planning, but my other question is, why wasn't the auction house aware immediately that the books had been stolen?
Well, that's a whole other documentary, friend, because it turns out that the auction houses do not flag up things that they believe have dubious provenance. They are often not, that's not their main concern. Their main concern is commission, and and so he says in the film, the idea was that they were going to go straight away so that that it wouldn't show up on the National Index of Stolen Art, which does happen, but it takes weeks and and all the rest of it. Clearly, she would have smelt a rat immediately, but she never reported it. It was never flagged up. It's not, and I spoke to someone in that business, and they were like, "Yep, that's not something that is not a policy. That if someone comes in with something that could be dodgy, but the way they were caught was because, as you see, they found the email they had sent to make the appointment in the library. They'd also used that email to go to Christie's. They went to Christie's. They found the phone number. It was registered to Spencer. But, it wasn't like she was flagging up going, two idiots came in with a stolen book. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Blake, you had a significant shining moment of acting in the car with the gun, and Chaz was rightfully pissed off that they gave him that phone number. Can you just tell us a little bit about that kind of moment of, as an actor, how you got in that space, having a director that has done documentaries and said that he had little, acting experience. How did that go? How was that? Because it was incredible.
So he's asking about the scene with the gun in the van, sort of what it's like to prepare for that.
Well, thank you so much, first of all, man. It means a lot to me. Well, with Bart, and I've spoken to all the guys, we all talked about it. The great thing about him is because he's worked in docs and worked with these real people going through these real things. He knows what the truth smells like and feels like, and he just wanted us to be honest the whole time. So it wasn't, he gave me the time to get there, and he would poke in with me and talk to me about things. I told him I was using music, listen to music, kind of taking a moment by myself, and then we'd kind of connect and we'd map out to where he was mentally and stuff. But all it where it stemmed from, where we felt like his mind was at, was obviously he felt like he was gambling this whole time with these lesser-minded dudes at the moment. He felt like he knew better, and he was just there for the money. He was like driven by the money. So when you don't get what you're after, and you realize, oh, I've been an idiot too all this time because I've been trusting this plan that's been kind of fucked since Jump Street. You're like, you're kind of swallowed up by anger at yourself and the people in front of you, regret, and then just fear of the consequences. So I feel like he's going back and forth, and go from being pissed off to being in his own world and looking down, and then he's connecting with them, thinking you guys are idiots. But he's yelling at himself just as much as he's yelling at them, I think. Yeah.
And I would tell Evan to do things to Blake that I knew would really wind him up, because Evan is also almost kind of method in his approach, isn't he? And that can be, and each of these guys have very different but equally brilliant approaches. But because Evan is so kind of in it and doesn't break from it at all, I would encourage him to kind of basically just keep winding Blake up off camera. When Blake was trying to tell him, get his point across, just to not allow him just to continue this sort of smug, incredibly irritating, combative sort of thing. And we would break the scene into chunks, because he goes through this process, one which is like wanting to kind of make them feel stupid for what they've done, then he wanting to threaten them into doing something, and and then the sadness which he portrays so brilliantly, of realizing the dawning of what this actually is likely to mean, and he's the only one that's realized that they're all now completely fucked. Yeah, and so
And by Bart doing that, telling Evan to go off, there's like bits of that weren't planned, that like I was just turning back, and like you realize how much resentment this one character's had for this other one the whole time, because he doesn't think he's been handling it the correct way at all. There's like, just kind of happy accidents that happened that day too.
Yes.
Hi. I'm a huge fan of The Imposter. It's one of my favorite documentaries. I
Good.
felt like there was a lot of narrative similarities between this, with the like art imitating life, imitating art, and unreliable narrators. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the main learning takeaways you learned in the process of making The Imposter that you took onto this process, maybe just storytelling or just the way of your thinking about the story. Could you talk a little bit about that?
So she's asking about things that Bart might have learned from making The Imposter in terms of telling a story with like an unreliable narrator and kind of, I guess blending stories that have fiction and nonfiction elements to them.
I think probably one of the things was that audiences care a lot less about how to categorize a movie. Critics and programmers and people worry an awful lot about, is it a documentary? Is it now? As soon as you put the real guys in, the whole movie in some people's eyes becomes a reenactment. But you're not going to describe Jackie, or I don't know, any number of movies based on a true story as a reenactment, but it is based on a true story. So audiences, as long as I think they are treated with a decent amount of respect, really and I think audiences are normally way ahead of us as storytellers. As long as you're treating the audience with a huge amount of respect, there aren't really any rules to what you can and can't do. I think you can do, people used to constantly ask, how did I get someone who looked identical to Frederick Bourdin to play him in the drama sequence of The Imposter? Those guys looked nothing alike at all. One was a Welsh bloke from, the valleys of Wales, and the other guy was a French Algerian. I mean, they're completely different. But in your mind, you make the link. The two become kind of one. And, there were techniques I used, such as the overlapping of lip syncing and dialogue and things to help stitch those together. But really, I think, I suppose I took that from it, that actually you can go quite a long way with an audience. And, people would read this screenplay and I think they worried that those moments with the real guys would puncture the whole kind of facade, that would burst the bubble of the movie that we were all enjoying. And that really was the intention. I felt like you can still do that, and actually it can be more than the sum of its parts, rather than suddenly now you're taking me out of the movie. And the intention was to do that, really. And in terms of other things that I learned, it was very much about this question of point of view. For me, most of the, both this and The Imposter, on paper, you shouldn't be able to relate to any of these people because, they're either criminals or, in The Imposter, it was a guy who steals the identity of a missing kid and a family who can't tell that their missing kid has returned completely different, but yet you do relate to all of them, I think. And I think as long as you're very clear about whose story you're telling, whose scene it is, I'm more interested in movies where you get to participate than when you kind of watch at arm's length. So it's really, for me, it's all about, how to think about making sure that you really understand this question of point of view and you get to experience it as close to the perspective of the person whose scene you've decided it is, and that relates to where you put the camera, how close, and what lens. All of that comes from that first question, I think.
Yes.
Kind of a thought bouncing off that. I think the film is like a really great commentary on like toxic masculinity. And did you find it difficult to find a balance between kind of condemning the way that they were feeling versus, celebrating just who they are as people and the problems that they were going through? I guess that can go to either of you, either performing it or telling the story.
There's difficulty balancing condemning what they're doing while sort of celebrating who they are.
Yeah, I mean, I always felt that because there was going to be a very clear point in the film where the bubble bursts, where the reality of what they're doing comes home to roost. That in their minds it's become this victimless crime. No one's going to get hurt. The books don't belong to anyone really. She's not an obstacle in their minds. She was going to just, I don't know what they thought was going to happen, and then. For me, the crime was the assault, not the robbery, so much. I mean, obviously, they're all part of the same thing, but that moment in which she is manhandled, that is the moment where the line gets crossed. And it was always very clear in the script and in my mind that was going to be where the wheels come off, and that was never going to be glamorized at all. It was interesting. We came in to the theatre just as you guys were watching that bit, and it's interesting. There's a lot more giggles in the initial heist than I ever anticipated. But then he treads on the glasses, and that's not funny. She pees herself, and that's really not funny. And there's a very clear moment where, oh right, so this isn't a game anymore. And so I always, because I knew that we were going to show that and what it feels like to do something you just shouldn't have done, and in that moment is a betrayal of the parents and all of the people that had done things for these kids, all the opportunities they'd had and all that privilege, and they'd squandered it, so that I felt okay in kind of in humanizing them and allowing them to be kind of to have fun in the build-up, because I wanted us as an audience to kind of almost want to sign up, want them to do it. So we're also a bit queasy when it goes too far, if that makes sense.
Okay, I just have one last thing. Oh, yeah, sorry.
How early on and how did you get to the title?
Asking about how early on did he find the title?
It came out of obviously it came from the Darwin quote, and the fact that they stole the Darwin, and the other book was obviously about Birds of America. And it was actually real Eric, who at the end you see he's writing the kind of the memoir, and that was my way of kind of giving him sort of credit for the title, because he was the one that brought that quote to my attention of, American animals having this, receded to the Kentucky caves. And in my mind, the Kentucky caves were sort of like these suburban pockets where people behind their picket fences are living this very sort of sanitized life that actually, we've evolved in Darwinian terms, not really to be very well equipped for survival, but to be very equipped for trips to the supermarket and tweeting and stuff. And so that was, and then when we hit upon that, it was like, oh yeah, this is it. And because obviously they behave like animals and all that,
Did it take the FBI longer to find Chaz's character?
Did it take the FBI longer to find Chaz? No, because what happened was once they got Spencer's phone number, they put them all under surveillance for quite a while, for a couple of months, because they wanted to know who was involved, and they also wanted to know where they'd hidden the books. And so they were under surveillance for, I think, between sort of February and I can't remember when it was that they were actually arrested. I think it was April or something like that. So it was a couple of months.
They really sweated it out.
Yeah, and they were in major meltdown, and all of that stuff about getting arrested for stealing. Spencer crashing the car, Eric getting in the fight. That was all kind of, it wasn't the same night, but it was all happening. And then they found Chaz. And one of the things that the FBI did when they were trailing them was they went and watched Ocean's 12, and the FBI guys sat behind them in the cinema while they were going, oh, we did that, and all that. Things we couldn't put in the movie.
I just want to ask you one last thing. I'm a huge fan of Udo Kier, and I just love that he's in your movie. Tell us about casting him, and if you have any good stories of working with him.
Yeah, I've got one good story about Udo. Catherine's laughing because with the casting of that character, we wanted someone who, because when you get to the end of the film, you realize that maybe Warren made that whole thing up. So I was like, well, if Warren was going to cast a baddie in his kind of story of what happened in Amsterdam, who would he cast? And we were torn between Rutger Hauer and Udo Kier, and Rutger was unavailable, I think, and Udo was like totally up for it. And then I was nervous because I'd heard Udo could be tricky to work with, and I rang him the night before he was due to come down, and we talked about the character and stuff. I don't know if I've even told you this, yeah. And he says, I love the script. And he went, but you know what I'm going to do is I'm going to, halfway through the scene, I'm going to get up and I'm going to rummage through some drawers. And I was like, what do you mean you're going to rummage through some drawers? It's a bar in Amsterdam. There's no drawers. Rummage through. I'm not getting any drawers. He's like, yeah, I'm going to rummage through the drawers, and then I'm going to come and I sit down and I'm going to look him in the eyes and say, do you know Faust? And I was like, oh man, this is going to be so difficult. It was going to be our first day of shooting, and I was like, can't you just do what's in the script? I mean, isn't that how it's supposed to work, you know? And in the end, and so I got off and I was like to Catherine, I was like, I don't think I'm going to be able to work with this guy. He's a fucking lunatic. When he turned up, he was amazing. He was adorable. He was brilliant. There were a couple of takes where he went into some kind of crazy sort of Dracula kind of character when he was like, you know, where he did a couple of versions of it which were just priceless, where he was like, you must go to the auction house and get, and I was like, maybe a little less of the, but then he's just, and he'll do a million different versions, and he's a class act, that guy, and incredible looking. We now are like, we speak most weeks. We're just like pals, you know. And, you know, him and, you know, Ann Dowd, who obviously is like one of the best actors of her generation. And as soon as she showed up, everyone went like, you know, she just raised the game again, you know. So, yeah, we were lucky. And it was lucky. I guess the script was unconventional enough for people to think, oh, this will be a fun thing to do.
Fantastic. And you're opening on June 1st?
Yeah, we open here in New York June 1st and then June 8th around. So I would say, you know, thank you all for coming. And also, you know, this is a small indie film, and, you know, we rely on, you know, if you don't want endless versions of the Avengers, you know, we need you guys to kind of, if you enjoyed it, please do get the word out there. It's really important, you know. We don't have those kind of marketing dollars there. So, but thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
So be sure to tell people about it. And The Imposter, I have to just plug this again. How is it available everywhere?
I really don't know. I know it's on iTunes. I think it was on Netflix, but someone told me it might not be anymore. But definitely on iTunes, and I'm sure someone's pirated it and put it on the.
Fantastic. You guys are going to love it. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thanks so much for having us.
Thank you for having us.